Good. So, hi everyone, and a good afternoon. A warm welcome to all of you for the panel discussion on safety-driven automotive security, decoding the industry's approach. Since morning, it has been quite an enriching session for me, right? And I have a few things that I'm taking back as learning. And during this session, we will continue to add to it. Now, to start off, when you look into the inception of the automotive, right, the primary concern has always been the safety of the driver, the passenger, and other users and travelers of the same road, right? Over the past couple of decades, vehicles have undergone many changes in terms of their structural designs. Innovations have made them lighter, yet robust material continue to improve the safety and the various safety features that has already been introduced. And I'm named quite a few of them, from safety, belts, to seat belts, to airbags, and so on and so forth. Rapid advances in technology in vehicle connectivity, interactive safety systems, or autonomous vehicle are changing some of these games rules. Now it is no longer about the mechanical components, and it is a lot of electrical. And somebody said this, and it is no longer about the drive, and it is about the click. Consumers too are increasingly getting aware of these technologies and making their vehicles safer and are willing to pay for the safety. Now, Mr. Prashant mentioned in the morning that the government is looking at zero, an initiative to road safety. Now, one of the automotive technology, if I can take it as an example, which would aid to that is the advanced driver assistance system. We call it in short ADAS. With increased connectivity among vehicles and the infrastructure and the industries move towards autonomous mobility, the role of ADAS is only going to increase manifold in the coming years. For catering to these requirements, ecosystems, which comprises of OEMs, suppliers, and partners, are working together to ensure that the safety and the security are paramount while undertaking all these transformations and adding these features onto your vehicles. Regulations and standards are being developed. Some of them are being rewritten to cater to these new changes in the automotive world, but there is still more to come, and some decisions to be made as well. Even government are aware about such facts, and they are cognizant of it, and they're looking at how to make the roads safer and secure. Now, the word automotive is also undergoing a change. The contemporary word, right word, would be mobility. People could be buying, renting, or loaning it or using them to get from one location to another location. And now, whatever the format the user intends to use, security, privacy, leading to safety and reliability is the main ask of such users of mobility solutions. And if I can re-quote what Dr. Sheshu Bhagwatola said in the morning, you could have a premium car with additional safety features. However, there is no leeway in terms of security, irrespective of the make of the car. So with that, in today's panel discussion, we have a set of eminent industry leaders in the space who would be dwelling deep into what matters and exploring it from different angles. And before I start with my set of questions, I would like to welcome the panelists, Mrs. Ujwala, Mr. Satish, Mr. Shiva, and Mr. Anand. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let me begin with my first question to Satish, just to set an overall context to today's discussion. So Satish, I know we have heard a lot of conversations, and I'm sure and the people who is listening to this conversation is also aware about it. But from in your words, what does safety mean in automotive world? Is it vehicle only, or is it broader?
Thanks, Praveen. Firstly, thanks for the opportunity. Like you rightly said, I mean, automotive was always about how dependable my car is. If I have an accident, what's my physical safety? Today, the definitions have changed. I mean, like the eminent panelists before have also spoken about. With connected vehicle technology, what happens is security becomes as critical as dependability. So we're now not talking about the physical crash. It could just be, for example, somebody hacking into a vehicle or a fleet of vehicles, which means that our technology implementations, the definition of security extends to availability, integrity, and you can also extend it to privacy or confidentiality. So based on what data I'm storing in the car. These are new dimensions for the vehicle, but does not stop at the vehicle. It extends also to the manufacturer with the manufacturing process. So we've heard about terms like Industry 4.0 and all that. Our automation lines are intelligent. They are automated. I mean, our production lines. Therefore, it is definitely not the vehicle. So vehicle, the production lines, And last but not the least, these are also people sitting inside the vehicle, so a car owner. So, and for the car owner, it's no longer about my safety, my security. I'm storing data in the car. And what I mean by in the car, I mean I'm storing data also in a potential cloud server that is either OEM owned or could be public in the future. So it really impacts all three aspects: car, the manufacturing line, and the actual user. And when I say impacts, I basically mean that all three are potential targets. And that's the way it looks like.
That's quite, so it's quite broader, right? So, Ananda, if I can come back and ask you to elaborate a little bit more. So in automotive, how are safety, security, and privacy related? And what measures do the OEM partners need to take to secure the vehicle and the customer data?
Thank you, Praveen, and thank you for the opportunity as well. So it's a good question, and I think it's quite a loaded question. On a lighter note, I'm tempted to say that it's like the Bermuda Triangle, but I'm sure some of the more informed colleagues and audience here would probably disagree with that statement. So as we, Dr. Sheshu said a very good context today morning, safety is about keeping the occupants of the vehicle itself, and I want to add to an extent, the environs of the vehicle itself safe. That's my perspective. Security and privacy are more closely related. However, from an end consumer perspective, they all start to merge, right? Safety and security start going hand to hand. And as Deepangshu and Kaushik mentioned earlier in the day, security must ensure that the safety is not compromised, right? To enable useful or safety critical features, right? So just what you mentioned, driver's assistance a couple of minutes ago, remote diagnostics, or even features such as VPAs, right? Virtual personal assistants. Data collection is to an extent required, right? It would be vehicle data, driver info, sensors. And as with any data collection, this comes with a challenge, that is protecting users' privacy, right? Now, the onus actually shifts to the industry, right? Without providing adequate security and privacy mechanisms, the user's privacy and safety both could be compromised. Now, you add to this, our cars are becoming increasingly software defined, right? With multiple connectivity options, and this gives rise to an increase in the threat vectors, and they're more susceptible, especially to cybercrime. This being a broad question, I want to look at maybe some top 4 or 5 areas, right, from a big picture perspective, and what countermeasures could be possible, right? So first of all, we have the cockpit controller domain, right, or the classic head unit, IVI, and clusters, right? This is a significant area in the vehicle, right, where you have very good customer interaction. There's a lot of personally identifiable information there. There's data integration to the cloud, integration of the vehicle comfort features, probably the domain that talks to several areas of the car and to the cloud, right? That is one area that's the top area, I would say. Then we spoke about cars no longer being isolated and they are connected to the cloud, right? Now we have the backend servers. Now, thanks to the connected solutions, you not only have to look at the car in itself, but you also have to look at everything with its environment now, right? Think about a scenario where let us say a backend infrastructure is compromised. Now an attacker has potential access to an entire fleet, right? Not to mention challenges such as being able to hijack the car or being able to steal user data, sensitive information, or even vehicular data, right? That's another area that deserves attention. Then we have the smartphones, right? Bring your own devices. All of us carry our smartphone tablets, and these days you're allowed to connect that to the car as well, right? So apps in the smartphone interact with the vehicle, and also thanks to the proliferation of Android more in the IVI context in the car as well, you now have the ability to download and install apps as well, right? So that's the third area I would say. Then I was reading an interesting article. This is the key fob itself. I wanted to say, usually you have these wireless, you have NFCs or BLE kind of technologies, and these days you can also use your smartphone as the key to your car, right? And there are reported incidents of spoofing these signals. For example, where you could unlock the cars without the valid key. So it's funnily not so funny for the victims, but funnily this is like a truly keyless entry where anybody could walk into your car. So that is another area which I would say would need. So cockpit controllers, the backend server infrastructure, smartphone integrations, and the key fob itself. are some of the key areas that we need to look at. And I'm not even covering some of the bigger areas such as automotive sensors, the charging networks, and the various areas. But these, I would say, are more visible and areas that needs to be secured. How do we protect, right? In my view, the solution is multi-fold, and I'll probably list out three or four aspects here. One is when we are designing and developing these systems, I think we have to include the safety and security goals inherently as part of the development process itself, right? And also utilize some of the relevant underlying mechanisms. Kushwant mentioned earlier in the call about HSM, for example, right? Then there is the adoption of standards and adherence to regulations. We learned about ISO 26262 some time ago for functional safety. Then we spoke about UN ECE, right? And also the ISO 21434, for example, right? That requires securing vehicles throughout their life cycle, right? And also have a well-defined cybersecurity management system inside our organizations, and also introduces a formal mechanism to identify threats, TARA as we call it, right? Threat analysis and risk assessments. That's probably the second area. Then we have more specific countermeasures, I would say, right? Examples are the IDPS, or the intrusion detection and protection systems, right? That will help detect unauthenticated messages, unauthorized access. Classic firewalls are also being able to identify patterns of usage to detect potential challenges. And then other simple forms, we have the classic secure boot to make sure only authenticated software is booting in the system, secure storage to make sure the user PII and sensitive data like keys and certificates are not being not accessed by unauthorized applications, and also classic encryption and secure user authentication such as PIN. For example, now Google has also started introducing the Strongbox for Android, which is more relevant from a IVI context. So these are some of the ways, in my view, through which we can secure and protect the the user data and personal information, and make sure that there is no loss of PII or no tampering or breach of the vehicle itself. Yeah, Praveen.
No, quite interesting point, Ananda. And so some of these points that you mentioned, and we will definitely come back, especially who is finally responsible, for all these things, right? The user, the drivers, or is it the OEMs, the partners, and who is responsible? So that's something that we'll dwell upon. And then you mentioned about regulatory and other things. So we'll have few questions related to that.
Sure. Thank you, Praveen.
So Shiva, and just switching to you. Now, Anantha and Satish and just set up a point saying that it is about the technology which is going into the car. This is also about the development of it. So let me play a devil's advocate and ask you this. Is this only a technology challenge, or can our environment, which is government, ecosystems, alliance, can also do something as well? What's your take on this?
Sure, Praveen, that's an excellent question, because when we always look at the cyber security or the safety, we look at it as only as a technology point of hardware design, software design, and ensuring mechanically it is protected, all those kind of stuff. But if we look at it holistically today, there is no standard mechanism to say universally this is how it need to be applied as a safety and security. That itself is kind of it is non-technical, but when we come to designing a product that is safe and secure, there are multiple regulations today all over the globe. Every country is taking their own take, and also ISO, SAE, and all the automotive forums are coming up with their own regulations. So there are common theme in it, but still there are a lot of variations between them when there is a global vehicle or a product being designed. So the awareness of those and ensuring everything is taken care itself is another challenging area here. And beyond that, the ecosystem, right? So the automotive ecosystem is not kind of an one person manufacturing a car, right? It is going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers involved in that, from semiconductor manufacturer until the final software or manufacturing of the whole vehicle, right? So in each of these steps, how do we coordinate? There are logistical challenges here. So there are multiple components coming together in a car. How do we ensure all of them are authenticated, right? So coordinating it logistically is needing a different skill and ecosystem as well there, right? And manufacturing. So when we come to a manufacturing, a typical manufacturing setup, we would be looking at doing certain testing and ensuring everything is okay. Now, with the security in place, it needs a different setup and skills to connect to the unit being manufactured, right? It needs to be securely connected. So even the manufacturing engineer should have the knowledge and capability to some extent on the cybersecurity, right? So looking at that holistically, right? So when it comes to different disciplines in the company that is manufacturing a product for a vehicle or components, right? So the procurement, for example, should know more about cybersecurity and safety so that they could take the right decisions. And the project management, so they should be getting involved in here as well. They should be familiar with different regulations, how is this being coordinated and things like that. Then when it comes to the manufactured vehicle, go to the user, right? So there are dealers involved and users involved. How do we educate them with respect to the security and safety, right? So there are lot more than technologically designing the vehicle or a component with the safety and security, in my opinion. Yeah.
Quite interesting, and Shiva. I think what you gave is a good picture, right? And it's just not about the technology, but it is also about coming together of a lot of people and putting that together internally within the organization and externally within the organization. But I think the next question, and I would like to ask Ujwala, and then I think you being part of ARAI, and probably you can throw some light. So let me put you in a difficult position by asking this: what is our readiness in India? How can we address this problem across industry? Because clearly, the gentleman, which is Satish, Shiva, and Ananda mentioned, saying that it is just not about a technology problem, or it is not about an OEM looking into it. It is much larger. There has to be an ecosystem, which has to come together. So, what's your thought on that?
I think, thanks Praveen for this question. And as you rightly said, it's really difficult question to answer. One way, simple way, I can say that yes, collaboratively, everybody has to really look into it. It's not one person's game at all to make it really secure. But as far as ARAI or in general, you look up to it, there are only regulation or the standards that you are referring to. Everybody also agreed that it's not going to be sufficient only to have the standards or regulations in place. So it's basically the entire ecosystem, the way it has been discussed within the entire actually whole today, as well as the discussions right now are. It's not going to happen that one fine day, like currently forget about vehicles. The digitization has changed, like use of the mobile phones, digital connectors, computers. How, when we are talking about data, privacy, how really individuals are responding to that, particularly with respect to the country that we are talking, like Indians are. When I've looked at least some reports where people are talking about where people are concerned about using the connected vehicles in the developed countries where the privacy is being discussed very, very focusedly. And most of the OEs, even in India, talked about that sorry for this, I think some aeroplane going here. So talked about that when people were talking about having the communication going more about beyond the vehicle numbers into the encryption. So those discussions I've heard in while doing the standards and regulations also, and I respect and agree to these privacy requirements and security and safety requirements. But our challenge is the awareness in the users by itself when it starts. Like, as I said, take automotive. Automotive, when we are talking, it's really emerging. If the data we only will want to believe, it says only 2% cars in India today are supposed to be defined as the connected cars, and we have a long way to go and emerging trend. I'm not saying it's going to take 100 years to do that. So it's going to be very fast, eruptive technology. But when we are talking about it as a consumer awareness, consumer readiness, that is also equally important. And that management, it's a bigger role for everyone, actually, all the stakeholders from OEs to government to all players, to make aware of this, sensitizing them about it. And when it comes to regulation, or the only automotive part of it, technologically also, it is not possible. Like technically, if you look into, we always say the subsystems should be tested, validated, regulated, technologically it should be handled. But it's not going to be only one system. It is integration and combination of multiple systems talking to each other to create an entire vehicle ecosystem. I think the real challenge is going to be with vehicle OEMs, because they are the consumer interfaces. See, when it becomes a consumer interfaces, something goes on, it directly comes back to the vehicle manufacturers, and they are really worried about it, about their needs, their challenges that they are facing. At the same time, when I'm saying we really have each one has a role, each one has a challenge to really look upon, and each one has a contribution to make the systems more effective. And it's not in India also, globally it is emerging actually, though we are been referring to multiple standards and regulations. I think SAE, ISO has been very particular about it. The way India follows also, the European regulations are coming in place. They are getting on board, but it's still upcoming. It is still getting emerged and getting deployed at this moment. So I would like to conclude with this, that collaborative, learn together we can. The way I would like to say it always, it is collaborative effort to make it functional at technological fronts, stakeholder fronts in the like OEs to tier 1, tier 2, to the consumer, to backend, and different functions, as Sivakumar said. So all those will have to have their roles, and the integrated approach and collaborative approach will only be able to solve these jigsaw puzzle or the final Bermuda Triangle to achieve across.
Oh, very, thank you. It was a difficult question indeed, but you have done given an overview about it. So, really, thank you for that. So, let me just switch gears and, probably ask this question. From a consumer preference perspective, Kaushik earlier released a report which showed about what is the insights that consumer people who are buying the cars are looking into it. So Ananda, if I can just ask you, you being in this industry and having been interacting with a lot of consumers, what is your thought? How has the consumer preference changed over the years, and are they looking at security as a decision point when they are deciding on which vehicle to buy? And what's your take on it? What is that you're hearing?
Thank you, Kaushik. So I would say that the consumer preference has definitely significantly changed over the years, and I would say especially post-pandemic, right? One of the interesting things that came up earlier as well is today we're witnessing the consumerization, right, of automotive at a rate that we've never seen before. And this consumerization is driving changes not only in the way consumers are engaging with the cars, but also how we perceive the role of the car in our everyday lives itself, right? And what do I expect from my vehicle in terms of the overall experience, right? In the past, consumers were limited, and what you could, what you got, and what kind of preferences you could apply, what kind of customizations you could do, right? Of course, there's always some mods you could do from aftermarket perspective, but today, thanks to the explosion of cloud and IoT technologies, right, consumers now have solutions like VPAs, smartphone connectivity, downloadable applications, and even feature on demand, right? We have over-the-air updates, and for example, the Tesla Autopilot is a classic example where you could pay some money and buy a subscription or pay a one-time fee and get the whole thing installed. So you now have limitless possibilities, right? And over the last couple of months, there's also been a big rise in consumers opting for personal mobility, I would say post-pandemic, right? And you have the adoption of EVs, which is growing at a faster pace, right? And when it comes to user interfaces, consumers now prefer natural and branded voice assistants, right, for a seamless experience. Now, what's more, right? Study done by Deloitte earlier highlighted that 80% of the buyers in India prefer some form of connectivity, right? And with new cars from our major OEMs pushing the bar on in-vehicle connectivity and also introducing ADAS features, we see that the interest levels in the customers are also shifting, right? So now with all this connectivity features coming in, the safety features coming in, and more avenues for you to explore, bring multiple apps and customize the vehicle to the way you want, right? So apart from these comfort and personalization aspects, now you have an increased focus on the safety and the security inside the vehicle, not only in terms of how safe am I, how safe my car is, but also in terms of what is happening to my data, right, around personal data and protecting information, right? Take, for example, now the personal data protection bill that's being considered here in India. So there is I would definitely say there is an increased focus on the safety, together with ADAS like features that can help a driver be safe both inside the car and also keep the environs outside safe. I would say more than full autonomy that can operate under all conditions, these flexibility, ability to customize, ability to bring new features, the safety inside the vehicle and the security, and also how my personal data is handled, there's definitely a lot more interest and a shift that's happening there. So I think generally, I believe this is a good news for all of us, right? If you react the right way, this consumerization will present an opportunity for all of us in the industry to transform this into something new and exciting, right? Both for the industry players as well as the consumers. Yeah.
Anantha, thank you. And I think there was one comment, and if I can re-quote again from the earlier session, which was more like it is not about the HP horsepower of the car, but it is about more features, and which is the deciding factor now. And like you correctly said, I am more interested saying that, let's say if I'm seeing a video on my phone or a TV in my house, and when I get into the car, I want to see the same video and the same thing in my car as well when I'm driving to wherever I need to go. So that's the preference, and that's the personalization and consumerization which is happening. Yes, and then people are looking into it, and how is all this data being secured and so Satish, let me just ask you this. So what is your suggestion? What measures do we need to take to keep the vehicle and the consumer data secure? What's your advice?
Thanks. So my organization's tagline or vision is mobility for an enriched life. Okay, and this line came up after a lot of let's say also intended and unintended puns, because you can really dissect mobility and enriched whichever way you want. But one thing that came out after that was, what does safety and security mean? So just like Anantha pointed out, so we always say this internally, that security protects safety, and there is no safety without security. So with that, we said, let's look at connectivity. And then the interesting reality today is any connectivity that happens is between the vehicle and an OEM's private cloud. Yeah? This will change in the future. When we talk about vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to infrastructure, a traffic light speaking to my car, you are now saying that I will speak to any cloud, and this cloud can be private or public. So the moment you bring this to the table, then you need to talk about what exactly the question that you said, what are the measures? So the industry measures typically, in my view, can be classified to what my organization or my business can do internally. And then, of course, environment, which Ujwala already alluded to a little bit, my environment, my regulations. Let me focus on what is internal to, let's say, what we can do within the organization. So before there are 3 points to it, but all 3 points have the underlying message that my car is proportional or inversely proportional, or my vehicle security, is inversely proportional to the number of external interface points that I create. Yeah? Which means that I need to factor in 3 points. The first is, what's my product positioning? which means I need to qualify what aspects of my vehicle do I want to expose externally. And this relates directly to the features that you were just asking earlier in your previous question. So that's first. The second one is my vehicle architectural design. And I'm talking about the network topology. Yeah? What interference do I want to allow or absolutely not allow between my critical and non-critical systems? And the third aspect is the lifetime of the vehicle. And this is where it gets interesting, but potentially also extremely disastrous. During the lifetime of my vehicle, which can be anywhere between 10 to 20 years, yeah, it really depends upon the culture, country, brand, so on and so forth, the vehicle must be safe and secure. Now, cybersecurity concepts must be applied to vehicles. We need to think of, for example, an antivirus in the car, just like we are talking about one on our laptops or mobile phones. Last point, which is not related to my organization, but environment. So just speaking on what Ujwala said, the awareness amongst the ecosystem, yeah, that this is a real problem. I mean, it is not just about, I want these features in my car. Somebody must also make sure that with all these features, I am safe to drive in the roads of Bangalore or wherever that I'm in. And for me, the most interesting part, which makes for a great, let's say, dinner time conversation, is that the end users must understand that this is an evolution. Yeah? What is secure today might not be or won't be tomorrow. And therefore, I need constant updates, upgrades to my system, to my software. And this is a very difficult mindset change, because at the heart of all of this is the question, who pays? So a lot of steps spoken about, but we need all of us to come together, including the end consumer, to say, what do I want to pay, or what do I want my OEM to foot the bill for? So that's my take.
Very well said, Satish. So if I got that right, you said security is inversely proportional to the interface. I like that, and probably I'll quote that somewhere else. But I think it's a beautiful quote, and your tagline of your company is also very good: mobility and enriching, right? So great. So with that, Ujwala, let me now come back to you now and just ask you this question. So we are talking about too many things right now, right? You also mentioned in your statement saying that we are looking at European standard. There are a lot of other standards which is there. So for a person who is looking in India and for making cars in India or providing services on mobility space in India, what would you recommend for them? What is the regulatory landscape for safety and security that you would recommend?
Okay, what I would say currently, as on a page, we do not have a regulation, Indian regulation in place. But at the same time, I would also say that there is already normally we do automotive industry standards for Indian regulations, and these automotive industry standards are formulated. ARAI is a secretarial body to it. Is formulated with the combination of the testing agencies, OEs, tier ones together, and we do have a standards committee where this subject has been identified, and there is already a move to go further as AI standard formulation. A couple of meetings have already done, but this is what is today. But what I would, when you're saying what I would suggest, going by a normal way, a normal guideline, India has been always following EU regulations part of it. And as you are already aware that ECR 155 has already been notified for 22 and year 22 and 24, and already standard regulation is in place. So that can very easily be referred. Of course, it back refers to ISO SA 21434 and related standards also. So this, as far as regulation is concerned, also when we are talking about so many regulations globally, there is a trend of harmonizing the standards and regulations under WB29, where people are talking about, like we have now, when we're talking about emissions, there we have a standard cycles globally whenever you go. Similarly, any product is developed for a country, it should be majorly adopted or should be acceptable across different countries. So WP29 talks about it. And under WP29, there is a subhead called JRAV, where these autonomous vehicles standardization is happening. And India is very active part of that. And there also this standardization, taking a reference from 155 EC is being referred and discussed. Of course, individual countries' inputs would be taken for further robusting and doing it at a global level. Even for India, when we do the AIs, that is automotive industry standards for Indian context, we always take references from the global standards or the typical EC regulations, EU regulations that we are referring to. But beyond that, we also take the Indian use cases very specifically with respect to the use patterns, use tendencies in different ways. In multiple ways, normally it is dependent on an environment, the way it is been used. So similarly, here also it will be relevant if at all we have a very different use pattern and use cases with or the user perceptions or user response to that. Like when we are also always talk about ADAS and safety part of it, functional safety part of it, I always say ki, what is important is driver is in center part. When you are doing any changes, how the driver is going to respond to that is important. And many times these driver responses are related to the culture or the ecosystem external to it. Again, you might not may like it or not. See, the same people when they drive the vehicle in cities in India and they go outside and drive the cities. So the environment matters. It gives the challenges and have the challenges all the time. So those use cases have to be referred, have to be looked into the perspective, and that has to be augmented. But it doesn't mean that the whole core part of it changes. It has to be referred the same way. I think a simple guideline from my side could be refer and go with the EC 155, which is giving the guidelines as a normal practice that India has been following new regulations and doing it. I would also say that AI's committee is already in place. The subject has been identified. The committee is already in place and started working and functioning out of it. And we soon would be having at least a first draft ready and to the public for their comments and views.
Sure. So, and if I can just add on to that question and ask you this: by when do you think UNECE regulations would become applicable? Because it has become a law in a lot of countries like Japan, Germany, South Korea has adopted it. Any timeline that you see? I'm sure the listeners are not going to hold you.
I know it's what I would definitely. I know it's very difficult to give me a stringent timeline and commitment on that. But at the same time, what I'm trying to tell you is that already normally we have a standard published in a draft format and adopted in as fast as 3 months to 6 months, and very bad as in some years. So looking at changes happening within the ecosystem and contributors to this AIC panel and the system, I really hope that it will be coming up very fast because few guidelines are already there in the place. Couple of meetings have already happened. So I do see I don't say regulation, but definitely standard would come. See, like there's a change between the standard and a regulation. Standard tells about what has to be done. When it's a regulation, it has to be notified, and the notification has to be done by the government of India, different governments, and then it becomes a regulation as such. So on the regulation, I directly do not have any control, or even ARAI doesn't have any direct control. But on the standards, the AIC has the control, and I really foresee it is coming in place soon. I'm only worried is still it is draft is not yet been released. So hope to have soon it is.
So thank you, Ujwala. I'm sure it would be useful for a lot of people who are listening to this to know that it is coming together. So Shiva, now if I can come to you, see, we spoke about various things which is happening, right? There are need for security and all these things are there. But what about the challenges? Is everybody doing what they are supposed to be doing, or is they not doing something? Is there any intrinsic challenge which is there? Because this is more like an emerging technology, right? And I think Ujwala also spoke about it, and Shiva also mentioned, and especially if I can quote Ujwala, she mentioned saying that right from mobile to cloud, there is a lot of things which is there. So all these are emerging. Auto is also adopting some of these things. So what are the challenges that people are facing? And if you can throw some light on that, that would be really helpful.
So when it comes to the challenges, right? So as you have mentioned, it is an emerging technology, and automotive is kind of a traditional industry where we are growing from mechanical and electronics, and software is kind of, I would say, getting introduced in the last 20 years or so, right? So when we look at from this perspective, how do we adapt the whole industry to this advanced requirements of, say, electronics and software connectivity when it comes to autonomous driving, the complexities, right? So having the whole industry educated and becoming an expert in this is, I would say, is one of the real challenges. So the industry is trying to mitigate that by bringing in people from adjacent industries. Say, for example, the mobile phone industry, or network industry, or some of the industries which is kind of ahead on the security. By default, they are connected, and the security was a prominent thing for quite some time, right? So those are all some of the mitigations, but I would say this is one of the challenges. And the other challenge is that, unlike other industries, here safety is very closely linked to this security, right? So if in a mobile phone, say, for example, it is hacked, say, to some extent it is a personal data, a financial loss, or maybe your productivity lost for a short time. But when it comes to the vehicle, any security compromise is going to be compromising the safety of the passenger's vehicle, and not even the passenger and vehicle, even the environment, right? When the vehicle is going out of control, nobody can guarantee what would happen to the people nearby and the objects nearby. So that way it is becoming more important and critical, and at the same time the industry is evolving to learn through it. So here, if we look at the feature, as Anantha have mentioned rightly before, the connections, number of sensors and actuators we have, and the number of units we are connecting to, right? So now, originally it was only the diagnostic connectivity to the external world. Now it is going beyond that. You have a Bluetooth connectivity, you have a Wi-Fi connectivity. Beyond that, now we have internet inside in most of the vehicles nowadays, right? So then it becomes more open for anybody to try hacking into it, right? So with all these connectivities, additional sensors and actuators, that is influenced by the more features coming into the vehicle. So today, vehicle is more being seen as a kind of a mobile phone with wheels, right? So that's how users wanted to see the vehicles, right? So when you add all those features and the autonomous driving, there are multiple aspects adding the concern to the security, right? So one is the sensors and actuators we have seen. The second one is the number of connectivity we have, wireless and wired connectivity to infrastructure and the cloud. And the third one is the complexity of the software, right? So similar to the number of sensors or the number of connectivity as points, right? So the number of line of code is also kind of impacting the safety or security, right? So when we have more number of code, a lot of open source, we are bringing in Linux, we are bringing in Android into it, there are more and more security vulnerabilities coming along with it. So these are all the aspects. So as we learn through this, all these complexities are coming in. Coping up with all that and ensuring the vehicle is safe and secure is a primary challenge.
Great point, Shiva. So mobility on mobile on wheels, yeah, yes, that is how it has become, and with a lot of connectivity, whether it is V2X, V2C, and all these V2V, it is a different combination. So Anantha, let me ask you this question, right? I think Shiva made a great point, right? And people, which is consumer, are basically looking at it as mobile on wheels. So there is certain expectations. I want more and more things, and I want all flashy things on the car. And there was also, somebody mentioned this, saying that when you look into the mileage, and when you look into the hardware, most of the OEMs are near to near pretty much the same, and there is not much of difference. So a consumer who is making a decision is basically probably making a decision based on the personalization and then the usefulness of the car, mobile on wheels kind of a thing, right? So between this consumerization and things, what is the challenge? And let me also add one more point to it. And now the consumer, some of the OEMs do allow consumers to make changes in their car. So who is ultimately responsible for all this?
So Praveen, on the second part, at least I should say, it sounds like a whodunit mystery. It's not a unfortunately straightforward answer to it. I will try to explain. I'll take the second part first, maybe.
Sure.
And they're linked, but let's address this. There's a little bit of I would say gray area. It is not everything is black and white. It's a complex ecosystem with multiple value chains, right? It's not the entire car probably has a gazillion components, not all built by one entity, right? Okay, so let's break this down a little bit, right? Let's look at it from a few aspects, maybe three aspects, I would say. One is let's separate out the data. We'll look at the data itself. We'll come to it a little later. Then the second point is what avenues does a consumer have to bring new functionalities into the car? I mean, where are you getting this from, right? That plays a very important role. And the security aspects around that. And the second and third point are kind of related. So let's begin there. For most of the features, many of our colleagues here, panelists here, and earlier, our esteemed speaker spoke. Most of the features and aspects that we discussed so far here today, they usually come built into the vehicle, right? When you buy, and that's why you mentioned saying, hey, the differentiation point is not here, right? There could be legislation or regulations or standards, and they raise the bar for everybody. The question is, where do you differentiate yourself? That is where this challenge arises. So unless you are really going overboard, right? It's typically not like an aftermarket accessory installation, right? Where you can go to a store and say, I'm going to buy autonomous emergency braking and stick it to my car. It won't work, right? So unless you are really tearing down the car or modding the car, I think there is few interesting scenarios to consider, and there is no straight answer. So let's look at the avenues a consumer has to bring such a functionality in the first place. So I'm looking at those areas which are kind of relatively easy to perform, right? It should not be very complex for the user to go get something, right? So one is you are today able to go bring downloadable applications, right? Just like how you install apps on your phone, you can install apps in your car. And I think that's what you meant when you said OEMs are allowing to customize. Now, this is done through an app store environment, but in the car, similar to your mobile. And it's mostly in the Android IVI context. As we all probably know, Android is getting more and more popular in the IVI sphere. These applications now may be third-party applications, right? Or OEM's own application. As an OEM, I could develop something and deploy it for my customer if I buy the OEM's car, right? At the outset, though this action may look like the same as installing an app on your phone, I think it's still not the same. I'll tell you my views, right? In the automotive context, the app store environment is somewhat controlled, right? There are checks and balances in place to to tell what kind of applications are first of all allowed, because it's a driving safety, right? You're installing it in your, for example, on your cockpit controller, and you're driving at 100 miles an hour watching a video. That's definitely a problem, right? So there are checks and balances on what kind of applications are allowed, who is providing these applications, right? And there are tests and measures and compliance in place to determine if there is any undesired behavior in these applications in the first place, right? So even with all of this, let us say somehow there is a security breach, then I would say the consumer is not entirely responsible. I am not speaking. I'm speaking in the negative. I'm saying who's not responsible. I'm not saying who is responsible. I would say the consumer is not responsible, right? The second avenue is smartphone, right? We spoke about smartphone on wheels. We have the smartphones BYOD. I can get my own device and connect to the car, and some of my apps can interact with the car as well. So here as well, it's not that there's any app on the phone that can interact with your car, right? There are specific protocols and security measures here as well in place that can prevent unauthorized applications from communicating with the rest of your vehicle. And some of our OEMs also implement proprietary protocols to that effect. So even if an unauthorized application somehow manages to breach the vehicle, then in my view here, this is more of a gray area. The responsibility may not entirely be with the consumer of the car. It depends on the value chain and what went wrong where. Third aspect to get such new functionality is through feature enhancements, right? Now, we gave the example of the autopilot earlier, where you could go pay a monthly subscription fee or one-time money and get this. So this is done through OTA, right? As a consumer, I'm buying a new feature, like the autopilot, for example, and these are delivered through OEM channels. Now, what if something gets tampered through the OTA in between? That's a slightly different scenario. We can, that needs a separate discussion. But I am buying a feature as an autopilot, for example, through the OEM channels, and should something go wrong with these features I'm buying, then as a consumer, I'm not responsible. So there isn't. So what I'm trying to say is the avenues through which you can try and bring additional features and customizations are still kind of managed through the broader OEM ecosystem. It's not that we could go get anything and everything that we want and bring it to the vehicle unless I do some kind of a drastic modding, right? That's what I would say. Now, and here as well, so I'm trying to say that the onus may be a little more towards the OEM and some of these scenarios, and where I am trying to subvert or try to use indirect means, and then the onus is probably on me as a consumer. So now coming to the data itself, right? Let's keep aside the general regulations such as GDPR that governs privacy and data through a broader legislation, right? It doesn't matter whose app you're using or what context you are in, you have a certain element of protection. Let's keep that aside. But coming to the data itself, not all data that is generated by an app, let us say you bought a third-party app that is also running on your phone. I don't want to take specific names, but let's say some popular media apps that you install in your car and you install your phone as well. But not all data may rest with an OEM. Some of the data does rest with the app itself, right? Specifically related to the usage of the application. So here, the risk is as good as the application running on your smartphone, right? You've already given your logins, your data, you have a whole bunch of applications running, and you've given the whole cell phone to the app. So similarly, I think here as well, in the event of a breach here, probably the third parties are accountable, but like I said, it's as good as installing this app on your phone. So there isn't a straight answer. We have to look at the scenarios, and based on the scenarios, we will have to figure out, where the responsibility lies. In some cases, it's the consumers, but I would say probably in some extreme cases, but in some other cases, it could be OEMs or the value chain behind the OEMs. That's what I would say.
So in short, there would have to be, the OEMs will have to end up building a vehicle security operations center to monitor what is happening between the car and how things are happening. And then they need to have a robust incident response to see, where does it really lie. And then probably in some cases, you will also have to go to the level of forensics to find out what really went wrong and to really get that kind of an information.
Absolutely. I think incident response becomes very important as well. Absolutely.
So good. And I see a lot of questions coming in right now. So probably before we go to those, answering those questions, 2 minutes for all of us to say, what does the future hold from your perspective? So probably we'll start with Satish. 2 minutes. What do you think and the future holds?
Okay, the future holds. Okay, so I'm looking into the crystal ball now. So
Yes.
I think the first is the technology itself, the environment, and the business model. Yeah. So from a technology perspective, I am hoping to see, or it will be mandatory to see, that the vehicle functions are decoupled from the hardware development cycles, which means that hardware and software completely separated. You have life cycle decoupling also happening potentially in automotive OS and applications, things like that. Next would be, from a technology perspective, the virtualization trend. Yeah, what I mean by that is, for example, hypervisor on a car is a reality today. Not in India, of course, but you will see that in, and some of us don't even know what hypervisor means on my laptop. Yeah? So the world is really changing much quicker than we can imagine. Another aspect of the virtualization trend is certain phases of the development life cycle which will change. Yeah? And COVID has accelerated. People are sitting at home, different parts of the world. Global development is the only way to move forward. Therefore, I believe there will be characterization of my business product. What I mean by that is, what I am selling in the market as a supplier is now my product has to be characterized by the highest point of integration. It will no longer be a black box. And this is where, from a technology perspective, the first setup comes. The second is environment. I mean, Ujwala spoke about it a lot, so I don't want to repeat it. I just want to once again repeat what Siva already said. Automotive is a conservative, really legacy industry. And now with connectivity and mobility, we have new age players who don't know anything about automotive, but they know everything about technology. So you have a 70s kid listening to now a Dua Lipa or an Astrid Des, somebody who's listening to music in the last 5 years. This is paradigm shift. Yeah, so we need to figure out a way that we talk to each other. My last point is business model. Yeah, and I think this is the part which will either accelerate or slow down a lot of the technology trends. And what I mean by that is, will the end consumer really pay? For the car that I drive, will I pay on a subscription model the softwares that needs to be upgraded? Will my car provide me the possibility during a service to maybe replace one ECU with the latest gen?
Yes.
A metaphor to that is, I walk into an Apple store, a service center today. I go in with my iPhone 11 and I tell them, please change the micro inside, give me the latest Apple chip. I'll install the latest iOS and it starts working as an iOS 13. Technologically, that might still be possible. I don't know if business models will allow. So this is the third aspect, which is for me completely open. So technology, environment, business models, these are the three aspects that we should really pay attention to for our future. Thanks.
That's a interesting analogy, Satish, and you mentioned. And in fact, day before yesterday, I was talking to a client, and the client mentioned the same thing, right? They were in technology, and they are doing now something on auto. And they said that it was earlier. It was like we were telling 70-year-old saying that technology is there. Now we are telling 30-year-old what is auto. And the shift from teaching a 70-year-old how to use an iPhone 13. And according to my client's word, was much easier than teaching a 30-year-old, saying that what does auto mean and what does manufacturing mean and what does all these things mean. So I agree to what you say. So Shiva, in 2 minutes, what's your thought on the crystal ball?
Okay. So from my perspective, I think there is one trend I see is the integration. Okay, there are integration of ECUs. As Satish was mentioning about the hypervisor or the virtualization started happening in the vehicle, and we are trying to consolidate more and more systems into one unit in the vehicle. So that is clearly a trend. And the other thing I see is along the lines Satish have mentioned is about, in the future, the vehicle is not going to be like manufactured, sold, that's it. After that, it's up to the user, right? So that is not going to be there anymore. And it is going to be, the future is going to be like the OEM and other owners or the vehicle are going to be in constant touch. And the vehicle, tracking the vehicle, ensuring the software versions are up to date on those vehicles are going to be with the responsibility of OEMs and other service providers, right? So again, the business model, whether the consumer would be willing to pay for an additional features is still a question mark. So that would only define whether the user is going to get an additional feature or not. But still, the OEM will have the onus on. They have sold a product with a lot of connectivity and features, and during the life of that product, it becomes their responsibility to keep it up to date and ensuring the vulnerabilities are removed. I think these two are the major aspects I see. Yeah.
Thank you, Shiva. That's really good. So, 2 minutes, and if you can share your opinion on what the future holds.
Sure. In addition to what Satish and Shiva mentioned, I'm viewing the car as the third living space, right? We spend a lot of time at home, and probably because of the pandemic, a lot more, but there used to be a time when home, office, and then the car, right? So probably looking at car as a third living space, right? It's catering to both productivity as well as entertainment. And that's, you have both comfort, convenience, and along with features like VPA, etc. You also have some interesting scenarios such as car as an e-commerce platform, right? What more can I do with my car? And that also leads to an additional, to another interesting point of, the evolution leading to driving the infrastructure around, right? We spoke about connectivity, we spoke about data. And if you look at the connectivity spectrum outside today, right, how consistent is it? Do we have that kind of bandwidth? Do we have that kind of data capabilities? Do we have that kind of reliability and consistency outside, right? I think as the automotive industry evolves, I understand it's maybe a little bit of a chicken and egg, but I strongly believe that the infrastructure outside will also evolve, and probably leading to a lot more use cases such as, CV2X use cases, kind of, for example. I think that would probably take this whole experience to the next level. As we used to say some time back, the experience per mile that you can get from inside the vehicle. Yeah. So car is a third living space, infrastructural boost, and car as an e-commerce platform, and possibly, like Shiva mentioned, the evolution of electrical architecture within the vehicle itself, and what is coming together, maybe zone or central compute, or domain controllers, how things would evolve. I would say that's what the future would hold, Praveen.
Definitely, and it will save a lot of time for the people who live in metro and who are stuck in traffic. And if a car becomes the third living space. Ujwala, what does your future, what does your crystal ball tell you from a future perspective?
Right. Praveen is going to be again tough for me because all three have said something already. So it's going to be tougher to differentiate what is not there. But I'll take in this perspective where I think ultimately what is going to drive is, we said that consumer and customer at a center point, and then looking at sustainability and safety as a ultimate goals of any mobility challenges that we are, or energy challenges that we are looking at. Like we're talking about vision zero for safety, or we are talking about entirely circular economy, or for the entire development part. So these are major on a bigger goal that we have, and a consumer at a center place. It is going to be ultimate drive through this, and if it has to be really done for changes, it is I think foremost thing I believe is collaboration, because it is not going to happen that single company, single party is going to have the ultimate outcome. So a lot of collaborations, strategic, and as I said, the right puzzles to be put in. You said somewhere we are trying to teach 30-year-old what is automotive. So I believe, which is important in the sense, why to do that? Why can't they collaborate? It's no more who wins. It is basically trying to collaborate with to deliver what is ultimately done. Then the third thing I believe is entire paradigm shift is the word I think they used. I would say entire automotive value chain would be entirely different. And when we are saying value chain is different, it is from design, manufacturing, during the life cycle of the entire vehicle itself, the value chain will be different, and different people have a different stake there, not only after in the operation, but post operation, or the end of the life of the vehicle by itself, it will have a different value chain and different players will come there as a third part. And I strongly believe that innovation is the change is the only constant that we have. The innovation is going to drive the future of mobility. according to me. So entire mobility that we are talking about, I think innovation is going to change the space. And innovation is, it will take care of these three drivers that we are talking about. That's from my side.
Great point, Ujwala, and especially on the sustainability part, because that's one topic, which is definitely going to be there in addition to the safety and the security part of it, and there is also going to be a lot of discussion around that. So with that, Dipanshu, and I don't know if you have access to those questions, and if we can take one or two questions considering the time.
So I would like. I'll take over, DT. Thank you very much. Thanks, Praveen, for that very engrossing discussion. We do have a couple of questions. I'm going to take them one by one. One is from Sarvana Kumar, who wants to know, could you spot specific issues and challenges for India EV electrification? I'm hoping that the question is in reference to the safety and security challenges and issues. Anyone can take that, or Praveen, I leave that to you.
We will leave it open.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good point for a discussion. I think more than safety, I think the question is here of accessibility, right?
Correct.
How the EV requires a broader value chain, if you ask me, right? And there's this whole concept of all the way from the power generators to the distribution to the EV, and how consistently reliably you can set up charging stations across. And I think that's probably one of the key driving factors, I would say, for EV adoption and avoiding things like range anxieties, right? Am I going to get there or not? Will I get stuck somewhere in between? I think that's probably a key point. I would say the safety and the security of this EV concept would come with that, meaning as and when there's increased proliferation of these charging stations. And I think there's also some, if I'm not wrong, maybe Ujwala, you could help me here, if there are any regulatory constraints here on who can sell power and how the distribution itself is handled. I think those will also have to come in place for us to get there. Yeah.
Yes, Anantha, I think okay, I'll first talk about what you said, and then I will maybe add on what you said. I think, yes, there are regulations, and there are, I think, ease of operations coming up, particularly when we are talking with sell of electricity, setting up our standards. Government is trying to push. Of course, we have different schemes how it is being handled. And if we talk about range anxiety and other parts, I think what I would prefer is probably role rather than safety security. I would say role of connectivity to enable this EV evolution, which is very important, and which could happen. Like connectivity will have in connection with security part, but connectivity will definitely have enablement to the EV evolution directly. As you said, simple addressing the range anxieties with different apps, giving where is my next charging station?
Absolutely.
How long I have to travel? Something like a simple things like that. At the same time, enabling telematics, particularly with BMS, battery, cloud computing, enabling AI models to put in for the changing and evolving battery models. So telematics is very, very constant and important part. It has become in today's EV architecture, and that is again going to enable. So connectivity is going to enable EV evolution, as I would say, or the acceptance of the consumers, or it can give solutions to consumer challenges or help in addressing the consumer challenges. That's what I would feel with this.
Absolutely.
All right. Any further inputs on this, or we move to the next one?
So just one point from my side, and got you. And so see, on the EV side of things, and there is a lot of things on the safety and the security side of things, and because depending upon the power which is going inside your car, and if the attack is not prevented, then it can lead to a mishap or a fire within the car, which could lead to a safety. And the charging, if the voltage stabilization is not being done, then there would be an impact. Now, can it be done maliciously? Yes, there is possibility to it. So are you securing the charging point? Are you securing the interface which is connecting to the charging point, and that entire thing is something that you'll have to look into it. There is also the aspect saying that, the privacy aspect of it, because when you connect to the charger, can the charging station pull out that information from the car is also another aspect, that you'll have to look into. So there are different perspective to that, and that's something that you will definitely have to look into from part of it.
Yeah. So Praveen, if I can just Praveen, just add 10 seconds to this. There's also the reverse also being true, right? Recently read a report of some vulnerabilities being discovered in charging networks that will allow a user to charge for free. I'm not complaining, but you have those aspects as well to look at. Very true, very true.
Right. The next question is from Sunil G. He wants to know, if we discover a bug or major problem after photo update of ECU software, how do we handle such a situation?
Whoa, I mean, if it's okay, I'll start.
Yes, yes, please.
This could be disastrous because on a mobile phone, a wrong update is just annoying. Okay, but in a vehicle that could be life-threatening. Typically, I would assume that the car becomes immobile and therefore would need to be towed back to the service station to fix the issue. If it's a scenario where the vehicle is still driving after a major problem, on a lighter note, never buy that branded vehicle ever again. So, but I don't know if there is an answer somebody else could add, but this is hopefully a situation we don't see in our lifetimes.
Yeah, and there is also a feature coming in most of the photo application today is a rollback, right? So when the flash is complete, when we discover a problem, the user would have an option to roll back to the previous version, so that at least in the interim he may not get the update, but at least he can be safe that way. Yeah.
Just to add on to it, and see, there are regulations, and like if you look into that UNEC R155, there is a whole section which is dedicated to SUMS, as they say, Software Update Management System. But the care and the due diligence which has to be taken lies with the OEM itself. While, like Shiva said, there is a feature to roll back, and all the things could happen. Even it could be an update, which is not affecting the core functionality of the application, but let's say it is giving you a user interface, things like that. But still, it should not be tried and tested, and left it for chance, because you don't know how that application interfaces with something else and then causes a issue to it. And take the simple example, Microsoft Teams. It doesn't allow you to see the video, but it allows you to hear the voice while you're driving in the car. But let's say with the new update, you can see the video, like somebody is, all of us, faces are there, then the driver gets distracted, with what we are saying, and which could lead to an indirect accident to it, right? So yes, there has to be a lot of care, which has to be taken. Don't leave anything to chance, because unlike like Satish said, it is not a mobile where it's not a moving thing. It could lead to a safety and life-threatening situation.
Perfect. Our next question is from Harsha SJ. Harsha wants to know, as end users' data is being distributed among many sources by the end user itself, will the value or the necessity of security or privacy reduce in the near future?
If it's okay, I'll start again.
Yes, please.
Actually, when I go around distributing my data, most of the times I don't even know that I'm distributing the data. And this is actually the challenge. If I knew that my data was precious, or somebody was selling, for example, my birth date, my address for 100 rupees, many times over, I would think about, do I want to give the accurate information at all or not? It's a bit like how cookies, for example, is a classic way that you steal data from your laptop. So I do not believe that the value or the necessity will change. Incidentally, this morning I got a WhatsApp forward, yeah, and it spoke about this is not in India, this is in Middle East, where a lady's bank account was siphoned off for about I think about $60,000 or $70,000 US dollars, and the entire process is captured on a video. I mean, unfortunately, I cannot show it on the phone, but everything from the name, the birthday celebrations, and therefore what date she was born, where she was born, all of that was picked up, and somebody was able to do a financial transaction in her name. Therefore, the risks of me distributing my data, like it has been pointed out here, tremendously high. My value will never come down simply because I value myself. And therefore, I don't want my data to be out there in the public. So I don't believe that the necessity for such data will ever stop. And maybe one last statement. These social media organizations make their money by volumes. It is economies of scale. Yeah, it is not economies of scope. So if you add another 1 billion people, they will make another 1 billion multiplied by something for themselves. Maybe our business models don't roll like that, so we don't value it. It is high time we start valuing it.
Anyone else who would like to comment on this question? All right, so I'll take one final question maybe before we close. This is from Raja Matihali. He says, despite having all the stringent regulations, as a customer of ADAS car in the future, he says, I still see it's vulnerable and can be hijacked remotely through cyber attack. When this happens, whom to blame, car manufacturer or owner of the car? Since the car is exposed to public internet, there will be threats. It may be ransomware call. What regulations may come in the future?
I think maybe I'll take the first stab at it. I think it's not about what regulations may come in the future. There are already regulations that talk about, multiple regulations that talk about security and safety and data protection and everything, right? We covered several of them. For example, we just mentioned about UNECE right now, R155 that covers on the cybersecurity front, just as an example. See, if an OEM's vehicle is, I would say, quote unquote, so leaky and unprotected that anybody could walk in and just hijack, then this probably, in my view, it is that OEM ecosystem to take the responsibility. Many of the aspects that we discussed here today in this session were how to protect for it, right? What all aspects we could bring in place in order to make sure that the data that is connected to the backend servers and what applications can have access to inside, right? How do you protect your smartphone and how do you protect your infrastructure? I mentioned about IDPS, etc. So all of these factors come into place in order to make sure that the user, the vehicle, everything is secured. I mean, and the one very interesting question that Satish mentioned was also that security is inversely proportional to the number of interfaces that you expose. So the threat analysis and risk assessments that you do, it becomes paramount that we identify what are all the threat vectors that I'm exposing from my vehicle, what are the associated risks with those, and how do I individually, for every identified risk, what is the mitigation measure that I'm going to put in place, right? And that is a structured development methodology that we will have to follow to make sure that at least all the known exposed vulnerabilities are addressed and are identified, and we have a mechanism to address each of those before I ship the vehicle out in the market. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you.